Voices,
the things they said,
voices,
some from those dead, all the voices heard.
Voices,
Things we say,
voices,
they're in your head, all the voices heard.
Hello, everyone. You've got Kempa.
And Skylar.
And Shannon.
And Flo.
And we have a special guest today in a longtime community organizer, Conrad Crump. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, welcome to the show.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys very much.
So this is an unorthodox episode. We are currently in the first hour of our first night of curfew here in Sacramento. The mayor has brought in 500 National Guards folks, and they are currently out there trying to stop this evening's demonstrators from demonstrating. There was a memorial set up at Cesar Chavez Park. We will get to that, but just so the listeners know, that's what's happening right now. If you hear helicopters, if you hear flashbangs, if you hear bullets, rubber bullets, that's what's happening. And that's what's been happening the last 3 days in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
So with that said, why don't we get started with sort of what got us here? Who wants to lay the groundwork for sort of the events of George Floyd in Minneapolis and kind of how this all kicked off?
Well, since no one's going to jump in.
All right. I love it. Take the
I'll
reins.
go ahead and kick it off.
That.
It's really disheartening. I'm sure everyone at this point, most people know about what happened in Minneapolis with the police and George Floyd being killed by the police. Just a horrible situation, and it's a situation that it's not like we haven't seen it before.
Yeah.
It's something that continues to happen again and again and again. So
in the off chance that somebody doesn't know the exact events of what happened, I just want to lay out like those facts.
Sure.
George Floyd was pulled over by police on suspicion that he had committed some sort of counterfeit, that he had used a fake $10 bill in a purchase. They cuffed him. He ended up on his stomach on the ground, and one police officer, this white man, pressed his knee into his neck, and bystanders were telling him to stop. There's a full 8-minute video of this, and he eventually died. From what a independent coroner or a autopsy report came out today, from asphyxiation. So this cop, according to that report, killed him with his knee to his neck. So that happened, and I guess we can talk about kind of what happened after that.
Yeah, and I think it's important for context that this was happening in the same week that the FBI opened an investigation into Breonna Taylor's death, and also in the same week that Amy Cooper in Central Park in New York was asked to put her dog on a leash in the Bramble, and where you are required to have your dog on a leash by an avid birder who was also a Black man, and she performed white violence against him by saying she was going to call the cops and tell them an African-American man was threatening her, and then proceeded to do that and cry as if he was attacking her. And luckily he was recording the entire interaction, and so you were able to see the amount of performance she was doing. You were able to see that he was actually the one saying, please move away from me because we're in a pandemic, and also, why are you coming near me? And so rightly, people responded by saying that was not okay. And I think that really sets the context for the type of week we're having, because we're in a space where we know that a white woman calling the police and saying a Black man is threatening her is likely to result in that Black man being injured or killed. And we all were outraged by that. And so that means that we have all come to accept that the police are not a neutral body to call,
Right.
depending on your identity and the circumstances.
Well, and can
And
in
so-
fact be used as a weapon against you.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so I think that's important context for us in thinking about then how we respond to what has happened after George Floyd and just the level of frustration that we're seeing in communities. And I think things are coming to a head because of everything that's happened in 2020. You know, we have unprecedented unemployment. We've all been separated from each other. Everybody was already stressed and tired and over it. And then you add the same old bullshit on top
Right.
of that.
Right.
And people were like, you know, there's only so much. Human beings don't deal well with injustice and don't deal well with high levels of stress. And that's exactly what we've done.
Yeah. Conrad, the first time I met you was during the Stephon Clark protests, I think.
Yes.
And you were one of the central organizers during all of that. And you know, we think back when Flo talks about context, there's a big question of like, how far back should we go in terms of context? Because it could be within the context of this week, right? With Ms. Cooper, or it could be within the context of Stephon Clark. He was a young Sacramento man who was shot by police in his grandma's backyard, holding his cell phone, and they claimed it was a gun. And there were no charges brought against them. So we could, you know, talk about it through the lens of our city's trauma and the, you know. But Flo, you also said recently, like, I mean, we could also provide the context all the way back to like 1610, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, depends on what year do you want to start with, and where do you want to start with this entire conversation, because we know policing has its roots in slave patrols. We
Right.
know the views around, you know, policing protecting property initially started with Black people being property.
Right.
And so, you know, so this is a conversation that we can start as far back or as recently as anybody thinks is appropriate.
Yeah, I'll just say,
right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
go for it, Conrad.
I was just gonna say, for me personally, you know, my, I guess, kind of like beginning into activism in this manner, like protests and so on and so forth, started at UC Berkeley as a student, an undergraduate student there when Oscar Grant was killed. You know, I was out there with some of the community organizers out there, just, you know, going out there because I didn't really know or have the same type of level of political consciousness that I have now. But I knew that it was wrong, and I knew that I wanted to do something about it. So I went out there and began to protest and made my little signs and stuff like that. And here we are, fast forward to George Floyd, and it's you know, the same old song. So yeah, that for me was kind of like my start. But I mean, looking at the Stephon Clark situation as it relates to our city, you know, there have been other men who have been killed by law enforcement prior to Stephon Clark in Sacramento. Many people don't know Lamont Harmon. Many people don't know Adrian Ludd. Many people don't know Joseph Mann. There's so many.
Darrell Richards.
Richards. Yeah, there's so many. So I mean, it's unfortunate that we can, like, you know, almost, you know, look at a timeline and just pick anywhere and, you know, have the conversation. So that's kind of like the reality of what it has been, you know, for folks of color, particularly Black folks in Sacramento and in the country. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And this has been a reality in the Black community for a long time. But it feels like folks who aren't Black are finally sort of starting to gain some context to this, that they didn't understand before. I don't know the answers to that, but I did see there, some stats came out that if you're a young Black man, you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting killed by police, which is like, that's wildly high.
Way too fucking high.
Really,
Yeah,
really
it's
high.
very high.
Yeah.
And weirdly, I don't know why this context, and maybe it is because we all have this sort of same surreality right now. People, even, white folks are responding to this case, to this instance. Could anybody try and speak to that?
I think you have a generation now of young white people who have been watching these videos for almost a decade now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the big thing that's changed is that there's documentation and that everybody has cameras in a way that we didn't before, and the footage isn't grainy and the audio quality is good, and right. And so was that a foot or an arm? Whose punch was that? Now that's out the window. Like, you're seeing things very clearly, and sometimes depending on how many people are around, you're seeing it from multiple perspectives. And so you have a generation who are now young adults whose first president they remember was Barack Obama, and who have a different set of expectations. And I think that's part of what separates generations, is not just like the time passage, but also like what shapes your consciousness collectively. And they have a different set of expectations for how the world should work than even millennials do. And so they're becoming adults in a time when people are unemployed, there's a global pandemic, and they're just like, they're frustrated, and none of this should be happening. And so, I think it reminds me a lot of Occupy Wall, similarly to Occupy Wall Street, which was like this movement. And Dave, you were a part of that, so you could certainly speak to it. But that was, thinking about, wealth inequality and the things that were happening there, and corruption, but then became so much more because there were all these people who were just frustrated by conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we were like sort of learning a language that actually existed before, but relearning it together. Yep. I feel like this one's a little bit different because it's like, this is the next step in Black liberation, right? Or like, we had Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. This is the step to try and bring us above that now. And there wasn't anything before that.
To go back,
I mean, I'm amazed that mainstream conversations we're having right now. I mean, they're, we're not, but like just the idea of even thinking over the last couple of years to have presidential candidates using the words reparations in primaries was something that did not happen before. So those are the things I've been like writing down. I try to do gratitude stuff to help with my own, mental health. And I've been writing down like just to remind myself so I don't catastrophize, like think about the things that are changing in the culture. So that I don't get down on the like same bullshit, different day.
Yeah.
I think like to go back to what you were saying, Flo, about like now everybody's got, everybody can go to Facebook Live whenever they need to. I think another big difference for people who are growing up right now is the way that the cops, because of that, have been forced to change the way that they react to police brutality allegations and stuff like that. Because I think it used to be that they could just be like, oh, no, none of that's happening. And like white people in the suburbs would be like, oh, good enough for me, Yeah. And now that it doesn't matter where you live, like George Floyd is in your fucking Facebook timeline. The cops have been forced, instead of acting like it doesn't happen, now, I mean, as we're seeing, now it's more of like, yeah, it's happening. Fuck you.
Doubling down.
Yeah, exactly. Do something about it. Which is I think another huge difference for people who are growing up right now, than it was when I was growing up, for sure.
Let's bring it to the do something about it idea, because people did do something about that in Minneapolis at first. there were very, very strong. And by the way, this is the same city that dealt with another shooting, a police shooting that, like, there's no way around it. This was wrong. Philando Castile, right? The man in his car who was just killed.
2 miles away. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they've been through this before, and they went out and they did their marches this time. And it did turn into much more than marches, right? And, you know, entire parts of the city ended up burning and stuff. And this was what, 2-3 days of protests.
Is the third day was the day when they took the precinct?
Well, the third day so they took the third precinct of the Minneapolis police department. There's a video of the cops fleeing it in their vehicles. I've never seen anything like this. And then the demonstrators, you don't know who, you barely see much of any detail because most of the camera work's way behind. But they ended up sort of just burning the precinct to the ground, which, like, I think people might have negative responses to that. I did not. And to me, that just seemed like a justified response, right? Like that.
100. It's the dream. Every time anything like this happens, that's the fucking dream. Is like, dude, go to where they fucking work, burn their shit down, make them run, make them fucking scared. You know, I've never seen it like that before.
It was chef's kiss. I've never seen anything like it. And it almost felt like we knew that, I think, demonstrations were popping up throughout the country, but I think that was sort of a rallying moment. Like, oh, the people do have more power than we think we do. If this happens there, like, is any precinct safe? And, you know, not to say that we are advocating violence. We are not.
Right.
And so we actually started some demonstrations. The first one was Friday evening. And I think that one was started by Tanya of Black Lives Matter, right?
Yeah, there was a vigil by Anti-Police Terror Project on Wednesday.
Okay. I missed the vigil. Okay.
Yeah, it was a smaller event, but it was on Wednesday, and then the next event, I wasn't aware of anything on Thursday. The next event I was aware of was on Friday.
Okay. And the Friday march was very interesting and pretty smart. I think the police thought that the marchers were going to, and there were a lot of marchers. There were over 2,000, easy. I hadn't seen anything like that since maybe the night that they took the Golden One Center. It might have even been a little bit bigger than that. It was huge. And so they sort of did this like fake. They made it seem like they were going to take the freeway and then marched on past it, then took a left and went down to the police precinct and had sort of, you know, a demonstration out there. Conrad, I mean, you were one of the folks, you had a megaphone, you were leading the charge. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, you know, when I went down on Friday, I decided, you know, to head out there because I'm, you know, from Oak Park, family's from Oak Park, right on 33rd Street. And the demonstration began on 12th Avenue and 33rd Street in front of Oak Park Market on both sides of 12th Avenue. A lot of people out there. And when I went out there, people were chanting. I brought my own bullhorn. I have my own personal bullhorn that I take with me to every demonstration, not just Black folks demonstrations. You will catch me at Pride. You will catch me at the Chavez March. You will catch me in any type of social justice demonstration where the community is gathering. And I went out there and, you know, kind of amplified some of the voices. I passed the megaphone around and let folks kind of, you know, and the energy began to bubble up. So we began marching. And as we were marching west towards the freeway, there's a freeway, and then there's Franklin Boulevard to your left. And the cops assumed that we were going to try to take the freeway. They had all the entrances and the exits blocked off on both sides. And it was like, no, we're not doing that, and went straight to the police station. And it was funny because we had about I'd say at least a good several hundred, almost 1,000 people initially. And then another drove of like maybe 300 folks, like a second wave just kind of came in.
Hell
and that
yeah.
was where, folks did the demonstration at the police station. They were able to get to the flag and put the Black Lives Matter flag up. And
That was such a good moment, man. I was out there,
It
and
was
when
pretty
they did that
symbolic.
shit,
It was very symbolic.
I was going off hard, man.
And so I'm in there chanting, and I'm like, I'm sweating, and I'm like, folks are like, who's this guy? And I'm just like, shouting at the top of my voice. My voice is barely coming back. But it was something that I had to do. I felt obligated to be there with my community. I felt obligated to be there with the folks who demand justice, who want to see justice for the Floyd family and for George Floyd himself. So, that was kind of like my little bit of, participation, I guess you could say, in it. I wasn't the organizer of that particular march, but nevertheless, folks were asking me, hey, when's the next one? What are we going to do? Because it was like so powerful seeing the community come together. And what I saw there were a lot of white allies, being in putting themselves in vulnerable positions, showing support, blocking off the streets, providing water for people, and it was really an amazing thing to see, which was a little bit different than the Stephon Clark protests. But nevertheless, it felt really good to be out there and, participate and have a hand in that. So,
Yeah.
It was also very cool that I felt like I was looking for people who weren't wearing masks, because that was a thing, that was a consideration for me when I was trying to figure out if I wanted to participate. Was like, this is a big group of people and there is a global pandemic happening, and I want to show up and support, but I don't want to get COVID-19 either,
Right.
So and I showed up, and everybody on Friday night was masked up. Not only that, I was searching for people who didn't have masks. Not only that, there were people, or at least one guy, going around with a spray bottle full of hand sanitizer and just being like, you want some? You want some? You want some? And it was very I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. We're
and then I saw a young lady handing out masks too.
Yeah.
She was like,
Yep. There were a couple of people handing out masks.
Here's a mask. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
This is good. So, indeed.
Yeah.
A far cry from the protests from 2 weeks before that, where people were standing on the street corner going, cough in my mouth, cough in my mouth.
Right.
They had a mask on with a hole in it. It's
Exactly. A little different. Little different
cry
situation.
from the reopened people. Yeah. As we discussed on the last episode.
Right. Conrad, I'm reflecting on a shared experience that we had on Saturday. Saturday was a big day for you. In your life, was it not?
Yes.
So,
it was.
for our listeners, Conrad had a big, I won't give his age away because he looks a lot younger than he is. So I'll let him maintain his mystery, but he had a big birthday on Saturday.
Yes.
Happy birthday. We will not sing. It sounds awful.
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
We tried that a few weeks ago. It was terrible.
We sang to my mom for her 70th birthday, and it's there's good dad
Some of our
and bad
worst
dad.
work.
It's bad. Yeah.
That's all good.
It's
No
almost
worries.
so bad that it becomes good bad again. It's bad.
Does the full circle.
Yeah. Anyway, happy
Well,
birthday.
it's funny you bring that up though, because so Saturday was my birthday, and I had gone out Friday, participated, thought about it, and was like, Conrad, it's your birthday. It's hard for you to kind of calm down because I'm on the front lines. Whenever I go out, I'm in the police's face. I'm right here with the bullhorn talking shit. And I'm really trying to get to their moral conscience, which, hey,
That's a
argue
tough
if they
road,
have one
man.
or not, whatever. But I'm
Right.
really trying to get to the heart, to the human,
Right.
beyond the uniform, beyond the badge. Like, hey, you got a wife, you got kids. Hey, like one officer, he had I wear this wristband for my grandmother who recently passed. He had a similar wristband for a fallen officer. And I said, you say that officer's name. I said, and imagine if that was your name. And I called the officer by name. And he looked at me and I said, imagine your colleagues chanting your name. How would that make your family feel? How do you think folks in your community would feel? And he kind of was like, it was like he wanted to start a dialogue, but he couldn't because obviously his orders were to maintain. Right. But there's things like that. So I'm always on the front line. So I told myself, Conrad, I don't want to get shot with a rubber bullet or a real bullet. I don't want to go to jail, and I think I'm just going to take it off for my birthday. So I decided to stay in the house. I stayed in the house, and as I began to watch on Facebook Live and Instagram Live and get updates from Twitter, I began to realize my entire city of Sacramento was falling apart. Folks were out of control. And warranted though. I mean, you can't try to control a person's, righteous indignation. Folks who have been stepped on and feel like they've been oppressed for so long, eventually they're not going to ask, they're going to start having action behind those feelings. So I decided, you know what, something's got to give. The next morning I saw all the aftermath, the broken glass. So I'm walking around.
Just so listeners know, this was downtown Sacramento.
Yes,
there was
downtown Sacramento.
A demonstration that started, which I think was a little grassroots. I'm not sure if there was like an org that started this one. It was a lot of young people early in the day.
And it started early in the day. And it was organized, I've heard, and can't confirm, by 2 college students. So it was a really young crowd of people who were likely, I don't know what their backgrounds are, even if they're native Sacramentans, but likely, are newer to this space and really drew out a crowd that was younger and a crowd that was newer to, at least some of the Sacramento activist spaces.
It was really cool to see. And I heard from a lot of journalist colleagues that a lot of the people they interviewed were like, yeah, this is my first protest. This is my first demonstration. Yeah. And so it's starting. But anyway, sorry, Conrad. I just
no, you're fine. But it was interesting. And
then by the end of the night, it sort of had devolved into some intensity. There was some, vandalism and stuff.
There was vandalism. Some folks, just doing some things that I personally, don't think I would have done. But then again, I don't know, but nevertheless.
And the name of this show is not to judge those folks. That's not where we're
right. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't even know what I would have done, in that moment. But nevertheless, I do know that, some things were going on and some shops got hit, Sharif's Jewelers, people of color owned. What is the name of it? Kicks, the shoe store.
The shoe store.
Those, like, expensive shoes.
Bevmo.
Bevmo. A lot of these different, Macy's. Just a bunch of Navins, or the name of it. Like a bunch of different stores were hit. And I told myself, it's probably a good thing that I didn't go out that night.
Yeah. But you got it. Okay, sorry.
I was gonna say, Conrad. I'm really glad you're telling the story this way, because my reflection on Saturday night was this. So, Conrad and I are friends, and so we had a Zoom with a few of our other friends to wish him a happy birthday, and we can hear in the back because he lives downtown, we can hear what's happening in the background. And I have been trying to monitor the situation all day. I'd been downtown earlier just to kind of check out the scene, but was really trying to honor vacation. And so, but I'm monitoring on my phone as this is happening. And this is how the Zoom went. We started with like a friend of ours trying to DJ. Conrad wanted to have a more serious conversation with us about life and reflecting on this birthday that shall remain nameless. And then we had this like really transformative moment. We're all crying. It's just like so beautiful, like this connection. And then we decide we're gonna enjoy the music again, and so we're dancing and whatever else, and then we're all kind of like out of the corner of our eye monitoring like what's happening here. And then we see the couch on fire in the middle of the street. And so then the music then like it's like a slow transition. The music goes off, and then the feed is now shared on the screen. And so we're now all together watching this live feed on his birthday. And by the time it's over, we're all like in a completely different headspace and are now like, I think we're gonna go watch ourselves. We need to check in on some folks. Let's get some eyes here. And it turned into organizing. And I just thought about how, as a Black person in America, you never know when you're going to get snatched out of your moments of joy and transformation and your human experience and just thrown into the reminders of all of the trauma of being Black. And it's just part of the trauma is not knowing. Like, you're having a birthday party and somehow or another the birthday party turns into everybody trying to make sure folks are all right. One person hops off the call to head downtown. Like, it's just like, damn, we can't even celebrate a birthday without having to keep this in the back of our minds. And I just thought about that as one of the ways for, our listeners who are mostly people who are empathetic and who are kind of on our side to begin to just think about what it would be like if at any moment in your day you're reminded of a trauma that runs deep and you never know when that's going to happen, whether it's your vacation, whether it's your birthday, whether it's your child's graduation. You just never know when you're going to be confronted with that reality and whether it's going to be something you literally have to fight about because it's happening to you, or because it ignites all these things around you, or because you just are knowing about it and you feel it in your own spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that was something that, was it, I didn't really think about it because it was like a natural reflex, it's kind of like, hey, wait, okay, I got to go into community organizer mode. It was almost kind of like the Batmobile phone rang and it was like, okay, party's over. We have to like mobilize. We've got to call lawyers. We got to get some legal observers, make sure that if folks are arrested, who do you call for like, bail fund, like all of these different things that community organizers do. And it was kind of like, this is what it is, man. This is why we're here. There are so many people that don't know, so many people that are, trying to figure out where to go, who to talk to, if I get arrested or what to do. And, being in that space to be able to provide, some assistance, is really rewarding, even though it is happening on your birthday in the middle of your birthday party, but nevertheless. And, I actually remember at a time while we were in the birthday mode, I was sitting on my front porch. And I kept hearing siren after siren after siren. And it was like probably 30 different police cars. And I was like, are you guys hearing this? And come to find out, someone had kicked the glass into the jail and on I Street, the main jail, like busted some of the glass. And like, so I mean, all these things are happening. So with that, we went into our mode and decided to show up for folks. Some of the folks that were on the call actually went down. These folks live in like different parts of the city, come all the way downtown to, make sure folks are doing it right. Those folks that are on the ground, make sure you have an extra pair of eyes on the ground as well.
Right.
Who are in communication with us. So if anything, we can, have that chain to like connect with other folks. But yeah, the community response, going back to that, I think is warranted, is justified. Again, that Saturday I stayed home, but the next morning I had gotten up really early and I wanted to see it for myself. I mean, I see it on Facebook. I see like all busted glass and the spray paint, but it's something different, when you actually are there. And so I started recording. and I'm recording, and I'm looking at Sharif's, and I'm looking at the Sprint store, and I'm looking at all these different things. And I ran into the mayor. And
Friend of the show,
Friend of
master
the
of
show?
crows.
I was like, this is it. This is the chance to actually, hold him accountable and have a really courageous and difficult conversation. So I started talking to him, and he initially was having a press conference. There's KCRA, there's News 10, there's all these 13 news. And I'm just kind of like, okay, so I waited for him, respectfully. He was talking about nothing. And essentially I said, you know what, Mayor Steinberg, I've known you, for the past 20 years. I've worked in the legislature for over a decade. You know me, I know you. I've been here at city council meeting after city council meeting for a number of different issues. And, I find it really difficult, for me as a Black man of this city, to have my mayor living and sitting in his sealed home while his whole city was on fire. That was something that I couldn't stomach. I said, if I were mayor, I would have gotten up, I would have gone down, I would have called city council folks. I would have been like, hold on a second, try to be in solidarity and understand, get a better understanding of community, and not just listen, but actually speak. I think a large part of being a leader, is listening, but also processing that what you're hearing and what you're listening to, and actually speaking life and speaking, solutions to what the problems that might be with your constituents. So I began to ask the mayor, given your track record, given your history, your the way in which, Measure U, for instance, money, I believe it was like $10 million off the top was gone over to the police. I said, you say all of these things here now in the community's face, but I know that you supplied Sac PD with a tank. I said, you're giving the rate in which you're funding the police department and law enforcement more broadly in our city is further pushing the knees down into our necks. So you can't say one thing and do the other. They need to be consistent. And if they are inconsistent, you've got some explaining to do. So I, questioned him on that, and he was kind of speechless for a moment. He began to talk about COVID-19. Was talking about how stimulus money from the federal government was going to help kids with pop-ups. And I'm like, that's not the topic of discussion. Like, you're going off on a tangent. I mean, I appreciate all of that stuff because the kids need that. They're in COVID-19. We are in a pandemic. Kids need, a lot of resources at this time. But at the same token, you're giving those resources to the police. Mm-hmm. There's police in the schools. There's police everywhere.
Yeah, I thought that was a classic deflection. He didn't address that head on because he has no answer to this. His city council just carte blanche. Here's $10 million per year out of Measure U funding, and the way he worded it, he made it sound like, well, COVID made me do it. No, he did this before.
Right.
Way more. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Way earlier.
I mean,
this was last year. This was before Measure U Community Oversight Committee was even in place. Right. So no, this had nothing to do with COVID. Nothing. This predates COVID by at least 8 months.
Yeah. Right. By the way, listeners, we all know that this interaction because KCRA actually published it. So,
can we link to that, please?
Oh, absolutely.
Dude. So I watched that last night, and I don't know you, Conrad, as well as like Flo or Dave. But I was watching this, and so not only was I like, this guy is a fucking rock star. I cannot believe how happy I am watching this dude just like not take shit off of Mayor Steinberg and like hold his feet to the fire. But but you have done you have lived one of my like ultimate fantasies, which is to like be in front of a politician who sucks with a news crew and just be like, nah, that's a shitty answer, man. Give me a better answer. Like, let's go.
And
I was watching this like,
he was like,
this is incredible.
He was speechless quite a couple of times. And then he was like, hey, you know what, you guys, everyone here, can we just sit down? Can we just sit down? And then so he takes a knee. And I'm like, Darrell, I'm not doing any of that symbolic shit with you right now, bro. I see you got the cameras here. I know about all of that. I want to talk about the issues. I want to talk about where were you last night? And then so another woman asked him, yes, where were you? I said, you know, he said, oh, I was in the community. And they said, where? Downtown. Where? Because we were downtown.
Yeah.
You know, it was just such bullshit. So I was just like, dude. So eventually I told him, I said, look, Mayor, respectfully, you ain't got it, man. And what I meant by that was like, you don't have the answers. Do you remember that famous interview with Kanye West and Sway from the morning show? When
How
Kanye
Sway?
said, you ain't got the answers, Sway.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't got it, man. You ain't got the answers. It was kind of like that. It was like, dude, you're not able to answer the most basic questions. A woman asked him, will you be out here with us at 2 p.m. at Chavez Park today? And he was like, well, she said, no. I know it's hard, but these are your options. Yes, no, or I'll get back to you. Pick one. And he's like, he didn't want to answer. So that just goes to tell me that he's not vested in this issue. He's doing it clearly for the cameras and
he's saying the words he needs to say. Yeah.
Right. You know, he's trying to appease the people. So
what I liked about it was, go Flo.
No, please go ahead, Dave.
What I liked about it was his PR person, Mary Lynn Valinga, was there. And she kept trying to stop things and like stop people from pressing him. And like she had totally lost control of the situation. And she it got to a point where she, like, you know, people are like, no, we just want to have a conversation. She's like, it's not a conversation. You're just yelling at him. Don't yell at him.
Right.
And
I said, Darrell, I know it's difficult. I said, wait a second. Don't shut down though, because this is where your leadership comes in. I know it's hard, but I really kind of need you to like address this issue. And then someone said something and he said, you don't know me. You don't know me. And then everyone was like, oh, hey. Like, you know,
Darrell is very sensitive. I mean, that's one of the things that, you know, activists, I think, you know, in many instances have prodded him because he is very sensitive.
He needs that decorum, you know?
Yeah.
He really needs that decorum.
If he has never said, excuse me to you, you're not a real activist.
True that. Yeah.
You know, the thing that's been bothering me for the past at least 24 to 48 hours about this whole situation and our response in Sacramento has been the way that we are able to, unfortunately, compartmentalize what's happening, right? So we see protests and we complain about the protests. We complain about shutting down the freeway, right? Like the ones where property isn't damaged, where we're just shutting down freeways or, you know, your streets are blocked off and people say this is an inconvenience, this isn't right. There's always this tone policing of how oppressed people are supposed to engage. Right. So when you then don't respond to the policy platforms that are given to you to follow that, right, and people get angry again and start to break things, then there's more tone policing. And so what frustrates me is that the council is going to come out and say, we want, you know, everybody to be safe. And I mean, even the signaling that Mayor Steinberg did on Friday, where he said, you know, we've already made progress on these issues. And he was like, I felt like he kind of patted himself on the back for that statement of like, Sacramento's doing well. And it was like, it was completely tone deaf. It was tone deaf. And this idea that now we need to be peaceful flies in the face of the, you know, far from peaceful ways that our mayor and council have been acting. Like they've done violence to this community when they bought that tank. They did violence to the community when they took that $10 million from Measure U. And they did violence to this community. And I know I don't think I've had a chance to talk about this on this show, but Measure G, which was on the March ballot, which was not a new tax. It was just to allocate $12 million, which is only $2 million more than they wrongfully gave to the police from Measure U. But Measure G was going to take those funds and reserve them for kids and for youth programming. And the council came out against it.
Right.
They came out against that measure. And what Jim Keddy and some folks at Youth Forward, and we partnered with them on this, did was write up a response to this that showed precinct by precinct based on where people lived who voted for it. And what you see in Sacramento is that people who were lower income and Black and brown overwhelmingly said, we want Measure G. We want this 2.5% of the budget set aside for youth. And our affluent and white community said, hell no, that's not going to happen. And so those are all things that the council did that were violent, right? And
there's blood on Darrell's hands.
Yeah, and I think the vote was like 7-2 or maybe 6-3 for that. I think that, I know Councilmember Chenier was on board, but we had very little support for Measure G from council. Their signaling was, don't do this, it ties our hands. And what they really should have been saying is, don't do this, it will cut our police budget, and that's important to us.
Right.
Because the money was always there. And so it is really, really tone deaf to turn around and say to communities, this is how you should protest and how you shouldn't, when you've done absolutely nothing to be responsive to the needs. So that's the part for me. It's like, I don't want to hear anything about how people should or should not protest. If you are in an elected official position and you have not done good work on behalf of communities, you don't even get to open your mouth and say or ask anything.
Oh yeah.
I think, Conrad, you're watching that video. I've watched it a couple times and it's just so good.
Fire.
You really got in there. And I think the thing that stuck out to me as someone who is really trying to intentionally do the work that needs to be done as a non-Black person of color to bring as much justice to the communities that I find myself a part of is this recognition that I think I already had, but was just sort of slap in the face, that we have a mayor who is willing to actively participate in the erasure of trauma that exists in the Black community. And he's actively willing to, he's willing to actively make decisions that continue to perpetuate the systemic violence and racism that is killing Black bodies, and he's unwilling to hold himself accountable to that, or to receive the accountability that I don't think Conrad should be the person that has to go out there and talk to our white mayor about what it means to live in a Black body. Our white mayor should be doing the fucking work. And it's absolutely, it's just another example of the injustice that exists in this community. We were talking at the beginning of the show about what is sort of the landscape, where do we start? Do we start in 1600 or do we start in 2014 or do we start, with Stephon Clark? Where do we start this conversation? And our white mayor should start, anyone who's white, anyone who's not Black should start at the fucking beginning and look at how, if you live in a Black body, you've been, to take Ibram Kendi's title from his book, you've been stamped from the beginning. And that's fucked up. And you can't stand in the middle of fucking K Street while you've got someone calling your ass out on the street and say, but I've put money into pop-ups for kids.
Yeah.
Are you fucking kidding me?
And I told him, I said, you can't throw money at the problem, Darrell.
No.
I said, that's not just, that's a part of it, but that's not all. You can't just say, I paid it and I'm done. You know,
But
it's like a
short-term
big-
solutions. I mean,
Right.
these are pop-ups. These aren't structural changes that are happening and they're not sustained. And the pop-ups had to fight. I mean, each of those nonprofits that are part of the pop-ups are getting $50,000. The police sneeze $50,000 every 10 minutes when they're out here on,
Right.
you know, trying
Right.
to just handle protests, right?
It's like
Right.
2 minutes of overtime right
yeah,
now.
I mean,
Yeah.
Seriously.
like it pales in comparison, and then we have to keep fighting for programs like Advanced Peace, which have made it so we haven't had any youth homicides in the city of Sacramento in 18 months.
Yeah, over a
Advanced
year.
Peace is doing great work on a paltry budget and has to keep fighting with the city manager and mayor
Right.
and council every 12 months to be like, hey, keep funding us. And they're like, oh, we're not so sure about you, but you want a Bearcat? Sure, we'll give you a
Right.
tank. Like, what?
Fucking
I think-
bear claw.
I think now is the perfect time to talk about some of the solutions that you two have brought forth. Because Conrad, on that footage, one of the first things you asked Darrell to commit to, which he very adeptly sidestepped, was defund Sac PD.
Yeah.
At the rate
Before we
that
do
you
that,
fund-
Dave, I do
Okay.
just want to say, so to Conrad's point and to your point, the mayor was called out 2 years ago. It was 2018, and I think this is really important, by Imani Mitchell and Elika Bernard
That's right.
at a meeting that happened right after Stephon Clark was killed. And Imani specifically said, Mayor Steinberg, you're not a safe person. You've come to this, predominantly Black space. You're not a safe person, and you need to do the work. And Mayor Steinberg's response to that was, you don't know me. You don't know what work I need to do. And
Classic.
Elika actually followed up, because this is the type
It's
of person
classic,
she is,
man.
with reading for him that I have a feeling to this day he is still not done. So, Darrell,
Was-
while you're at home,
Was the reading White Fragility?
I don't remember what book she gave him, but she followed up with at least one book for him
Ugh.
that she was like, you need to read this. You need to do some work because you don't have a good racial justice lens and you don't get it. And as a white man, you're coming in here. I mean, he started out quoting Dr. King in the most ahistorical way
Oh, Jesus.
Fuck you,
possible.
Darrell.
Dude,
Fuck you.
dude,
And
that
I
is
just had
the
to
bane of
stop
my
him. I was
existence
like,
on Facebook.
Piece of shit.
I was
Oh.
like, what you're not going to do is turn my Black revolutionaries into little
Hey.
pacifist old men with why, like, they're not Yoda, okay? As much as I love Star Wars, you're not going to turn Mandela and Martin Luther King into Yoda, okay? That's not who they were. So, but I really want to elevate both of their voices because they said that to him 2 years ago.
2 years
I
ago.
don't
that's
think he's
right.
followed up on doing that reading and really thinking critically about this.
Yeah.
Dude,
Well,
I'm
Imani and
online on
Elika,
Facebook.
Founders of Black Women United,
Yep.
and just want to elevate, young Black women out here doing this space, speaking truth to power, and
Doing it for a
trying to
long
educate our
ass
mayor, and having, that fall on what it feels like, or just, unsympathetic ears.
right?
Yeah.
Just totally tone deaf,
Yes.
and uncaring. And when I said white fragility, it's his response to being pressed by a Black person on
Right.
his whiteness and
Is
racism.
you don't know me, you don't know me, you
Is
don't know me.
anger.
Yeah.
It's-
I mean, he told
yeah.
the Black man to sit down with him because why? That wasn't solidarity. That was
No.
calm down. Let's sit down.
Yes.
Calm down.
That was calm
Let's
down.
sit
yeah.
down. Let's calm
Fuck that.
down. Let's no. And that's the thing. Another thing I think about as it relates to this is just in general, not just the mayor, but a lot of white people broadly, they don't have that proximity to Blackness or Black people, although they could, because we're everywhere. But it's like, I don't know whether they choose not to or whatever the case is, but by virtue of that, I believe that goes into their conditioning of what they've been taught, all of this. So they, like Mayor Steinberg, I truly believe if he had a conscious Black person on his staff, he may be able to answer some of these questions more appropriately, or maybe, just think through some things. So it's one of those things where it's like, if, folks would actually not be afraid of us, but just be willing to engage and listen and just, hang out and break bread. Maybe you might get to know these people are actually really dope ass people. And like, why am I afraid? Like, what the hell? What was I thinking?
Right.
I mean, I know that takes years of undoing because society has conditioned, all of us a certain way. But, that's just one of the things that is just kind of like, man, like you don't have anybody on your staff that can inform you. You don't have anybody that can kind of tell you why, and like folks are really truly clueless. So I won't go off on a tangent, too far off on my tangent.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, it's just, like I was saying at the early beginning of the show, I just graduated with my master's from USC School of Public Policy. And I'm proud of that, and in our cohort, there's about 20 something of us, I think like 22. And one of the individuals in our cohort is a law enforcement officer, completely clueless, over his head. So we're like in this WhatsApp chat, with all of our cohort, and he and I are like going at it to like 1, 2 in the morning. And I'm like, I'm not backing down because I'm upset because again, I didn't get to go out and protest on my birthday. So I'm like, I'm firing off, I'm giving my points. I'm like, trying to explain. He's not getting it. But what I realized is that the other folks in the cohort were. And that was kind of like, man, folks were, direct messaging me like, hey, man, wow, I completely, see where you're coming from. I'm in support and solidarity with you. This was an injustice. This was wrong. There's absolutely no excuse. There's no way you can justify it. The law enforcement officer in our group was like, oh, I fear for my life too. I fear for my life, how can you, and then one of the other students had to check him and say, how can you even compare your job,
Your profession,
right.
You can
that
quit.
you've chosen, that you can
Right.
quit at any given moment. I can't take this skin off. I can't take these dreads out my hair. If I take them out, they'll grow right back. Like, I can't, like all of the things, this is, my life. This is who I am. And it was just mind-boggling that some folks didn't quite get that. But I believe some folks, at least in our cohort, are beginning to.
Yeah.
And that gave me a little small semblance of hope. So.
Can I ask to both Flo and Conrad, at what point is it not your job to try and educate someone like this cohort classmate, and it should be a white person's job to do that? Like, I've heard a lot from Black friends about emotional labor on this stuff. Can you help listeners sort of understand that a bit?
So the way that I approach it, and I Rolanda Wilkins frequently says, Black people are not a monolith. And so I always like to remind people of that when I start to speak on behalf, is in general, there are plenty of lists that have been put together of resources, reading lists, entire curricula, to be able to educate yourself on race, to be able to educate yourself on trauma, to be able to do that. And so the expectation should be that if you want to educate yourself, you can go there to find things. Mm-hmm. What I do think, though, when you have relationships, and I'm going to emphasize relationships with people, is that for the most part, the folks who you have relationships with are probably willing to share their experience with you, are probably willing to have conversations with you. But I would be cautious about when you want to have those conversations, because in the immediate aftermath of yet another Black person being killed is not the time when people want to sit down and have philosophical conversations with you and educate you on what Bell Hooks said 20 years ago. Like, go read a book, get a clue, like, do that on your own. But if it's a random Thursday and we're having drinks, like, we're probably really open to sitting down and having a conversation with you about what's going on, about our perspective on things, answering questions, etc. But that comes with a relationship. And where it becomes a problem is when you think that any Black person you've ever known who you've never given to, supported, or done anything else, suddenly in the aftermath of something you don't understand, you can then demand of them their time and an explanation. Or if they say something you've said is problematic, you can then demand that they educate you and explain themselves. And that's the part where I think people balk, because they're just like, it's not my problem. And so I am protecting my energy now, and I will just tag White Nonsense Roundup and will not engage. And White Nonsense Roundup is a great group of white allies who literally come and round up white nonsense, and they will post links. They will engage. They will engage all of your questions. They are like, this is our job to educate each other, and we're not going to force Black and brown people to do this labor for us.
Right.
And I'll
That's
just
awesome.
say,
I've never heard of that. That's incredible.
Yeah, you can tag them on Facebook. I know for sure. I'm not sure if you can also tag them on Twitter or other places, but I know on Facebook, if you tag them, just make sure the post is public. If the post, even if it is, depending on what the settings, sometimes they can't come in, and you have to actually add them if you happen to have those controls. But they will come right in and handle it for you.
You can also sign up as a white person to be a volunteer for that group, so that when somebody posts or tags White Nonsense Roundup, you can be the person that come and gets your people and tells them.
Very fun.
That's awesome. That's so fucking cool.
Yeah, I was following Flo had to ask White Nonsense Roundup to come get their people a couple days ago for someone, because he was oof. And it's great. They just like jump right on, and they're like, okay.
It's like, Dave and I's favorite driver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That guy.
Conrad, you were going to say something.
Yes.
No, I was just going to say, just dittoing kind of what Flo said, just as it relates to, we're tired of educating. We're tired of infantilizing white people, making them out to be, okay, so this is how this works.
Right.
And this is connected to this piece. Like, fuck that. Like, nah, we ain't doing all of that shit. Like, Google is right. You have literally a computer in your freaking hand. Like, literally, if you really were interested in learning about this shit, you would literally be already at least making the effort to educate yourself. And that's not happening. You know what I mean? So it gets to the point where it's just so much of a put off. It's like, especially as Flo said, right after immediately after a traumatic event happens, someone, wants, that I was just gonna say that in and of itself is white privilege. To require that of a Black person, so that they educate you in the midst of the trauma, in the midst of all of the turmoil and the things that are triggering them based off of their own individual experiences that they may have had. I've had guns pulled on me by law enforcement before. You know what I mean? So just those feelings like, am I gonna die? It's just my last moment. And then wait, you want me to like come here and like educate you after I'm just like my blood pressure's up, I'm like short of breath, and like my chest is like, you know what I mean, my heart's beating fast. I mean, all of these different things are like, it's just, no, we don't have time for that, and that's what I said earlier in the show. It's just really a matter of self-care. It's a matter of saying, hey, you know what, I gotta check out. Now's not the time. Now's not the place. This isn't the place or time, to have that conversation. But I do think what you said, Flo, is very powerful. And that is the aspect of relationships. Relationships can get you a long way. But when you don't have those relationships with folks who don't look like you, you form your own opinions, you form your own assumptions, and based off of how you've been conditioned to believe of that people, whether it's fear or whether it's to criminalize them or whatever the case may be, it's unfortunate because you miss out on, trying to build that bond and trying to get that understanding with those folks that you say you want to be educated on, that you say you want to learn about, that you say you want to figure out how, we're right here, but you have to be genuine and, truthful and actually trying to develop and establish that relationship. So
Especially when that narrative.
It's funny because it's never those people who act. Like, it's never the people who are actually in relationship with you who would be like, "Hey, there's a thing I don't understand." It's like, those are never the people. It's always somebody random who comes out of nowhere and is just like, "Well, explain to me why." Well, you know, it's a random coworker. It's just somebody that you don't have that relationship with, and then you're like, all these white people I know, who I would have been glad to answer this question for, they're not the ones who are going to ask it. It's over here.
Yeah, Flo, you teach me like the deep cuts in Black culture that make me like uncomfortable, and I'm like, am I supposed to laugh at this or not? Like,
well, it's especially sucks because the narrative, like, I mean, like for people like you guys are talking about, like people who have just don't have that many relationships with people of color and just aren't around people, like that's why it's so harmful for the narrative around something like Saturday Night to be framed in the way that the media frames it and the way that Darrell Steinberg is framing it, because people who don't know any better are looking at that. And if you let the message be like, Black people are going crazy in Midtown and like breaking out all these windows with no context for it, people who don't have any relationship to that will believe it and they will go along with it, you know? Like kind of to that
perpetuates the bullshit.
Exactly. And like kind of to that point, like we've kind of been dancing around the, I think nobody wants to be like, I'm glad that people are like small businesses are being burned down or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like it is like, it's hard to quantify that, but in the face of something like this, like the context that people do not have is that these protests are always peaceful until the cops escalate it.
mm-hmm.
You know,
Totally.
like these are peaceful protests, but and what people are not fucking thinking about is that say that I'm, like an 18-year-old kid and I'm at this protest with my girlfriend and I'm all fired up because I'm taking fucking political action in the street and I'm sitting there having a peaceful protest. Well, if a fucking riot cop shoots a fucking tear gas grenade into my chest and then breaks my girlfriend's arm with a baton, while I'm fucking peacefully protesting, yeah, dude, I'm gonna want to fucking burn some shit down after that. And that's on the fucking cops. That's not on these fucking kids who are trying to do the right thing and peacefully protest.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. They've always been violent. The cops have always been violent.
Mm-hmm.
They've never de-escalated. It's always been them. And weirdly, this time, and maybe it's like some shitty thing, like because there's more white people participating in the protests, like the general public beyond just like the community of color are just like, oh fuck, like this is ugly.
This is
and
ugly.
like even these like white journalists are getting personally targeted by the cops and getting shot with rubber bullets. Jared Goyette, former editor of Sac Press, he got just like beat the fuck up by Minneapolis police a few days ago. Like, they're targeting journalists. They shot a photojournalist through the eye, and now she will not be able to see through that eye.
Right.
This is happening all across the country. And I really do think that there's some weird tipping point happening. I said this on the last episode. Like, there's only so much social capital that cops can have. Right. Even though it felt unimpeachable for decades and decades after the like tough on crime 90s, it feels like there's a shift.
Yeah, it's incredible to fucking watch, man. Dave, I think you're right. Last time I kind of gave you some pushback on the social capital thing. But I mean, this has been some of the shit that's getting shared around. I mean, just the shit that I've seen from somebody who's been out in the streets for the last few days. Like, I can tell you, I mean, and it's anecdotal, but like, I can tell you that I have been in multiple violent situations that were peaceful until the cops made it violent this weekend. I would bet that if you go and talk to just about anybody else who's been out in the street and dealing with the cops on the front lines, they will tell you the exact same story. And that's just younger people or people my age or whatever. But then you get like the cop in Seattle who like maced that little girl, or even there was a 15-year-old, Zach PD shot him in the through the cheek with the fucking rubber bullet.
Well, right here, the 13-year-old who was shot with the rubber bullet and had to be carried out on Saturday night. Like, I mean, it's just
this was Sheriff's Department.
And you're absolutely right, Skylar. I think one of the things that we have not been clear enough about is, the scientist in me really wants to do a natural experiment. I just have the police just go away for a couple of protests.
Yes.
Let's see what happens.
Totally.
Yes.
Because the protests I've participated in, the police has never helped. They've not helped with traffic control. They've not helped with crowd control. They're not there in a way that is productive or helpful to the tone of what's happening. And I'm of the belief that there are maybe 2 or 3 things that the police actually have under their belt that they do some semblance of good under. But I think that if they suddenly went away tomorrow, if we just snapped our fingers and the police just all what was that it was a very conservative or a Christian movie where people just disappeared.
Oh,
the rapture happened.
The rapture.
If the police just got raptured tonight and they just didn't exist tomorrow, I think people in the community would be able to step into those roles and do them a lot more peacefully and not a lot more effectively. And I have I'm just, that's just my feeling on it, but it's based on my experiences with them where I've watched them actively escalate situations, show up and be the ones bringing the violence that they then claim that they're helping to prevent. And I just don't think that they're often in a position where they're more helpful than they are harmful.
I agree.
Yeah.
I want to make a plug here. Verso Books. It's a publishing company. Today, they just made one of their books free as an ebook. It's called The End of Policing.
Mm-hmm.
The End of Policing. And I've had people, actually most people don't understand the concept of an America with no cops. So this is a great book to point them to sort of discuss why cops are a problem, why they are perhaps the problem, and what a country without them might look like. I'm sure there's a lot of other books out there too. But I love that flow.
And I just wanted to circle back. There was a comment that we were making about, people sort of demanding an education. I am going to paraphrase, this will have no attribution, but an actual email that somebody's colleague sent out this morning was I want to admit that I don't get what's happening. I bristle at the term white privilege. I think lives matter. I have the utmost respect for law enforcement, and I don't see how destroying property and infrastructure helps in any way, shape, or form. So there it is. If you can help me understand, you can help many. This is what this person showed up to work to this morning.
This is obviously a person that doesn't want to learn. They don't.
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of here are all of the just really inflammatory things I can think to string together in one sentence. Teach me. And I think the comment was something to the effect of because if you can help me understand, you can help many.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's just to say there are many others that feel that way.
Right.
And I'm just so you've spent the last 5 days not even bothering to use your Google machine. Just you were sitting on this, you were wait till Monday morning. I'm going to drop this doozy on my office.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's fucking bullshit. I'd be fucking infuriated.
Deeply inappropriate too
Yeah.
in a workplace.
Yeah.
That's violent.
And that is why there is a big there is a big movement for people to just call in black. Just be you know what?
Yeah.
Yep.
Not today.
Fair.
I can't do this.
Can we move on to Conrad, you had this glorious moment that our press captured with the mayor Sunday morning.
Yes, Sunday morning.
And then Sunday, another demonstration started. This one was put on by APTP, the Anti-Police Terror Project. The
hyphen is between police terror, not anti and police.
Oh, I get that wrong all the time.
Yeah, so it's anti-police hyphen terror project, not
even if it were Even if it were that, I'd be like, yeah, I'm totally behind that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little less cool than I thought it was.
Yeah, let's go
now that
commit
I
some
know
terror.
that, but that's still
Against
like
them.
kind of cool, I guess.
Good to know. But it was put on by them. They are a legit organization, and if anybody wants to support this movement financially and what's happening out there, they are a really great
Extremely worthy cause.
group
Yeah.
to
And
think
also
about.
behind MH First, which is the emergency mental health that is available on the weekends in Sacramento. So again, a really just thoughtful group of folks who are actually trying to advance that as statewide legislation known as the Crisis Act. So it's a pretty dope pilot that we already have here from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. on Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. If you need assistance, anything from, domestic violence planning, mental health support, any of the things that you might need mental health emergency support with, they have volunteers as well as, medical professionals who will help out with that. And it's an alternative to having really only 911 to call.
Yeah,
Right.
and as you say, 911 is really the only other emergency number, which means cops will show up.
Yep.
And they are not trained as mental health professionals. They tend
No.
to escalate, as we have laid out very clearly. And, before you know it, they've caused some real harm. So MH First is trying to provide a community-oriented option outside of that. And were we to defund our cops here in Sacramento, that might be a great place to throw some money.
I think that's a huge part
Yes.
of imagining any kind of police reform is fucking replacing 90% of these idiots, at least, with social workers who are actually equipped to handle the things that need to be handled in the city,
Yeah.
And
So-
or money, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes we don't need to be patronizing to people who have less money. We just need to give them more money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was obviously another protest, and then it was just round two, night two of the same thing that we saw happen Saturday night. Helicopters out all night, cops really overdoing it, and some vandalism as well around the central grid of the city. Fast forward to today, let's talk about the politicians' response. You outlined, Conrad, very well for the people of Sacramento what Darrell's response was Sunday morning. His response Monday morning was kind of a bit more of the same, right? Although he took it a step forward. Today he hinted like, okay, I think it's time for us to impose a curfew. Okay, I think it's time for us to, not only that, he started using language that was classic language used in all of the social movements in the last 50, 60 years, right? Outside agitators, right? That's what they used to refer to Martin Luther King as when he would go march in a particular city, right?
Right.
And here we have Darrell Steinberg holding a press conference this afternoon, and probably the one this morning too. Darrell, I saw you on Jay and 12th. And I was glaring at him from afar.
Yeah, that's how
I
we do
showed
it. here
him.
at
That's the way
Voices.
you get him.
We give him some bad looks.
Like, I'm watching you, man. I'm sure nobody in the press gaggle pressed him on the issue of how much money he just like vomits up to the police the way that you pressed him Sunday. So again, I think that's like deeply commendable. And I think that's a real indictment on our media apparatus here in this city. Anyway, Darrell worked together with City Council. He worked together with Governor Newsom, and they have imposed what we have in the current moment. We have our helicopters outside. We
Yeah, I
have
can
the
hear
cops and the National Guard rolling in. 500.
In tanks. There are tanks downtown
There are
right now.
tanks outside of our homes right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're defending our arena. Thank God for that. And so this is our reality now, and right now. And this is how our politicians have responded to this very, very important moment. Can we get some comments here?
Well, I mean, I think it's it's indicative of same old song. It's kind of like this is what they do. This is what they've always done, and it kind of makes me wonder if the politicians are fearful of the police, because I mean the police are bullying everybody. You know what I mean? They're bullying the community. They're punking the legislators and the elected officials out of money. Like
the police
it's almost
union is
like a
strong,
bully.
man. Yeah.
Like it's like a bully walking up to the mayor and the city manager and like patting their pockets. Like, what do you got? You know what I mean? Give me that 10 million. I know it's in here. So I mean it's something's got to give. Something's got to be done. And that's what I was kind of getting to, was a complete structural overhaul, which in my mind, they don't think is possible. They don't think that that's a reality.
They can't fathom it.
And yeah, they can't fathom something like that. But I absolutely know that it can be done. If you can abolish slavery, you can abolish the police. Yeah, there was a hell of people that didn't want slavery to be abolished. But guess what? Look at the outcome, right? So it's like, okay, think about what the outcome could be if we abolish, police and policing and change it into what it should be. Community response, trauma response teams, things of that nature, to where we're actually affecting the issue, having people in community who know these people. Oh, that person has a mental health issue. Oh, this individual has a substance abuse issue. Oh, this person has whatever it may be, and have the appropriate resources to respond to that, instead of just the same, and I explained this to someone earlier. I said, it's kind of like the police are like your dad coming in, like a horrible dad coming in and like twisting your arm because your room isn't clean, but you're a grown ass man paying your own rent. It's like, wait a second. Like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, that's not your job. Right. So, I mean, it's mind-boggling. But again, they don't have the wherewithal to even imagine that as a reality, to fathom that as something that could be, as our new reality. So
the city of Sacramento has plenty of money. I don't know the budgets of every city in, the state, or certainly not the country, but the city of Sacramento has plenty of money. It just doesn't spend that money in ways that are really productive to having good health outcomes overall. And I'm just going to frame this as a health issue. Like, if Sacramento really wanted peace, it needs to be proactive and responsive during the relative peace times. You invest in these things, you shore up your prevention so that you don't have to have as much emergency response. And we just, culturally, we won't do that. We always want to be in the business of doing emergency response, but we don't want to do. It's like we're perpetual 12-year-olds. Like, that part of our brains that does advanced planning is just not developed, so we just won't do it. Like, we don't plan at all. We're just like, oh shit, that happened. Let's wing it. Let's figure it. It's just at what point do we grow up as a city, as municipal governments throughout the country, and say, we're going to invest in prevention?
Right.
Yeah.
I think something about all of this shit with, the development of bringing in the National Guard and instituting a curfew, I guess I'm not surprised. I'm just really fucking up, angry, furious about how our mayor just continues to use really dangerous language and make really dangerous decisions for this community. What the fuck is he doing? He didn't stop to think about what it actually means to bring in the National Guard. Right. That is him giving the green light to more Black bodies dying. To more, just what's going to happen? We're going to have more Black folks in jail. We're going to have more Black folks that are attacked by the police. And it's also emotional manipulation and fucking gaslighting. Yes. That there isn't an actual problem with the militarization of police without fucking bringing in the goddamn military. Like,
Right.
it's so frustrating to me that this, instead of having a conversation, instead of listening to what Conrad had to say on Sunday, like that went in one ear and out the other.
Completely,
Instead of actually holding space for that and sitting with the discomfort and learning from it, the very next decision he made was to jeopardize the lives of Black people in this community.
Just to take a violent problem, and just dump a bunch of more guns on it.
Totally, yeah.
Because all you've done is lower the bar for what criminal activity is now.
Right.
Now, criminal activity is being outside your house after 8 p.m.
Right.
And so you embolden law enforcement to, engage in the very terrorism that people are out protesting against.
And we already saw
exactly what you're going to say. Go ahead.
We already saw what the police do when we give them the permission to do things. They go out there and they fuck with people. They get all of a sudden, it's just this wild ass, Hulk-like aggression.
It's evil. It is wild.
You look at the faces of some of those cops that are just having fun shooting rubber bullets at people. Having fun, people who are just standing in the middle. I mean, this happened in Oakland. We can name every city that had a protest over this weekend. There was a person, multiple people just standing, and police come through and they charge the fucking streets and they just push them down. They're not doing anything violent. And and pushing someone to the ground is the least violent act of terror that the police committed on people. It's horrifying.
And I'd like to just mention, for folks, this, what people are experiencing in Midtown and downtown right now with police brutality, this is the terror that exists every day in an Oak Park or in a South Stack.
Right.
This is their reality finally coming into your neighborhood.
Right.
Welcome to this.
It doesn't feel too good,
No,
folks
it sucks.
are upset. Neighbors are pissed off, and it's well, welcome. Where have you guys been for the past 30 years? You know what I mean? This is what folks have been going through time and time again. And that's another aspect that I brought up to the student in our cohort, who's an officer. I said, you know this. You're an officer. There's different types of policing styles. That the styles are based off of which neighborhood. Legalistic, watchman, and service style. You don't have a legalistic style in an Oak Park, or you don't have a service style in a Del Paso Heights, or you don't have a watchman style in Folsom. They're not consistent. You know what I mean? You treat certain neighborhoods as if they are less than, and then you corral and police them and criminalize them. And then the media comes in and says, all those people over there are bad. Not in my backyard. Don't come over here with that shit. Go ahead, Dave.
As a member of the media, I just want to say thank you because that's a huge part of this puzzle here, right? Mm-hmm. The credulous fucking media that has for decades taken what police say as gospel, right?
Right.
And not treated them as, what do you always tell us, Dave?
You don't treat them, what they do is they treat them as authorities or as experts. What they need to do is treat them as stakeholders in any given situation, right?
And you opened my eyes to that. I had never thought about how, that frame. I'm not a journalist.
Yeah.
So I had never really considered, how police are brought into a story. And when you said that, I was like,
yeah.
That's the problem.
It's funny too, because I've reached out. I've actually chatted with the Columbia Journalism Review on writing a piece where I drive this home, and they were like, well, don't we always treat them as stakeholders? And I was like, oh man, do you watch the news?
Not when the B feed is behind the police line.
Yeah. Right.
Taking their literal and figurative vantage point and taught and only showing. I mean, it's even how you tell the story. Like, I've learned so much of this from you, Dave, is like, they're out there and the only voices you can really hear are the police, right? You hear vague shouting in the distance, and then they hone in on violence, right? But there is no interviewing of the people who are out there asking, well, why are you here? Well, what's happening here? There's no context for being able to actually see what the police are doing, because you've taken their vantage point and all you're able to view are the protesters, right?
Yeah.
And so, I feel like that even happened to me with the Capitol Public Radio last year, when after the East Sac March, where the cover photo for this was me standing on a chair yelling and crying, and you did not see the pictures of the police in City Hall chambers standing on the other side of me holding batons out that they were prepared to use in full riot gear to use on people who had been through metal detectors and were unarmed. And that was not, they weren't anywhere in the picture. Like, I'm okay. Like, some people were upset because they feel like Black people are constantly being depicted in pictures with their mouths open and yelling and showing emotion, and it just reinforces like stereotypes. But I was angry, and I refused to allow my human emotion of my righteous indignation to be taken away from me. So I don't mind being seen as angry, but what bothers me is when that anger is just like, and then the caption is protesters interrupt city council meeting, and it was like, first of all, you cowards walked away on your own.
And
we
you
were
were
at a
telling
recess
them
when this happened.
Yeah.
And second of all, you're not even showing what happened.
You were telling them in that moment that the police line was traumatizing people.
Right. But that's not what shows up. It's protesters disrupt city council meeting.
Right.
And that's the kind of stuff where it's like, you took the police's side on this without actually even depicting accurately what happened. And I will give a shout out to Capitol Public Radio that they did change the image and had a whole conversation with their editorial team about how that happened. And I really did appreciate that, because the LA Times did not.
I am friendly with the photographer and the editor, and they took that very seriously. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I did too.
They're great people, and he's
and that's the kind of stuff that I'm saying. Like, when we
I actually like
know
that
better,
picture
you
of
do
you.
better. Yeah, I have no problem with it. Because I think, and I even use it when I talk about vicarious trauma and the different ways that manifests itself, and how my Black ass had no business being at that city council meeting that day anyway. But and it's like it's a reminder of all of those things. But the picture itself is fine. It's just lacking context.
Right. Yeah.
And then was actually given like misattributed context to it. So then the image is like, I interrupted the city council meeting by standing up and yelling on a chair, right? Like, that's the message that's being told, and that couldn't be farthest from the truth.
Such a misrepresentation. So
and I just want to I really wanted to drive home that the biggest real I guess perpetrators of this credulousness towards our police forces, it's so often TV shows, TV news, TV channels. They have to turn over a show very fast, and their editors and producers, the higher ups, they know that they are speaking to an upper middle class white suburban crowd, and they know that fear will get them watching tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And what they do is they take cop press releases and they fill the time with them. They love to take a photo of your mugshot, and a mugshot is a modern day fucking perp walk. They haven't been convicted of anything.
Right.
They don't deserve that. And they put it on TV to show you, look at this scary man of color, right? And it really perpetuates not just like all of the racism that's been baked into our culture and who we are. It also perpetuates this, like, we need to trust our police force. They are keeping us safe. When in reality, it's like, no, we're all just people. And the police are really, at the end of the day, the ones creating this environment.
Right. Not even to add to that, another thing that news stations do all the time is run stories like look at this police officer busting kick flips in the parking lot. And like this police officer went around like, you know, an underserved neighborhood and gave everybody ice cream.
Propaganda.
Yeah, this guy fucking pulled over somebody and then like gave him $20 instead of giving him a ticket or whatever, which is my favorite because it's like this person, this cop just traumatized the shit out of this person. Just be like, psych, here's like $20 or whatever.
That's an abusive relationship, right?
Yeah, 100%. And like, watch, like every time, like something like, you know, every time there's something in the news cycle about police brutality, we do this for a while, and then you're going to start to see all of this shit that's like, oh, you know, this cop bought an ice skating rink out.
This
for all
cop
these
can bake brownies.
Exactly.
It feels a little bit to me almost like if you were to just take this propaganda, I really like that word, and just like go back 200 years, and it would be like the story of like the kindly master who gives not just scraps but real food to his slaves. Like
right.
Like, really? Is this the story we're doing? Like, do you think this makes up for something because this police officer knows how to double dutch and decided to, you know, decided to like jump in the middle of the, like, what is happening right now? Who thinks this is a good idea?
The thing that I think is it also, what that propaganda does is it stops the train of thinking that, so there's the intent of the cop, of maybe the cop or the cop, whatever it is, like the intention is like maybe good, like, look, there's good people, you know, like cops are good people, which, you know, bullshit because they're all bastards. But
hell yeah.
But what it does is it silences the voices of people who are seeking policy reform and justice in communities. And it's like, oh, well, maybe everything is okay because look, that cop brought pizza to the thing where the people are upset.
Those cops took a knee.
Right. Like, I'm so tired. Like, I'm done. Anyone that I see posting a fucking picture of a cop taking a knee or with their arm around someone at a protest, I'm done. You're you're muted. You're as done to me. Like, I can't right now. We can't keep using these moments to trick ourselves into believing that cops are good people.
My favorite thing over the weekend was multiple accounts where people were like, yeah, this cop took a knee with a bunch of people and then proceeded to just like fucking shower us with rubber bullets.
Right. Like, well, they took a knee with people long enough, like while the news teams were there, to where like they could put that on the front page. And then when the news crew left, they fucking like shoved a bunch of tear gas down our throats. Exactly. Happened all over the country this weekend.
Oh yeah, I mean, they know that they know exactly where the cameras are. Yeah. Like, and they're aiming for them.
There was a news director for a local TV station. I wish I can remember who. I think it was KCRA last night. And she was, you know, creeping behind the cops, right? And she was talking about how they were urging protesters to move and speaking about their violence in the passive sentence, right? Which newspapers are very guilty of that too, right? Like, you know, like that teen who, like, a sheriff's deputy shot this kid through the mouth, through the cheek. And it's just like, you know, protester takes rubber bullet to the, you know, face. Right. It's like, oh, well, where did that come from? Like, was it just like, did it just like fall off the fucking parking garage? Like, no, somebody shot this.
Or it'll be like cops dragged into a quarrel with protesters. Yeah. You know, as if like the cops really didn't want to have to do this, but like someone had to step up and do it, you know.
8 protesters run over in New York. Oh, who, like, how? Like, was it like just a runaway vehicle, like a Google car that had no driver? No, there was a fucking cop behind the wheel.
Yeah, or the cop behind the passenger door who opened it and hit that guy as they were driving away.
Yep.
It's
like,
well, we infantilize people in power, right? So, like, you know, and even the way that we're willing to engage these, like, policing is a system. And so, but we're willing to call out these individual officers and say they're not, it's a few bad apples, right? But then we'll turn around and paint all protesters or all people with like this broad stroke, and nobody says, well, not all protesters or not all Black people or not like that's not it's not all cops, it's not all men, it's not all, it's always people with privilege who are then being given this sort of benefit of either not being responsible for their actions, right, or the benefit of individualism.
Right. I mean, one of the things for me, fuck, I lost my thought. Never mind. Edit one.
Ooh.
Edit one. All right.
I hate when that happens.
It'll come back.
I think
so you're talking about infantilizing people in power, if that triggers your brain.
Look at him.
No, I lost it. I'll come back.
Picturing like swaddling a little baby Darrell.
Swaddling, just wrapping.
And that was one thing I did say to Darrell, though. I said, given your track record, given your historical ways in which you've handled these types of situations, just know it's in your track record. It's in your historical record. So no matter what you try to do in your political career in the future, folks will know, we will mobilize, and we'll vote you out. Straight up. He was like, well, I hope you do. I said, we will. Oh, mark my words. Like, guarantee.
Don't worry, Darrell.
Yeah.
Please. Like, I'm looking forward to this. Like, this is now something that's like, now that I'm no longer a master's student, I got time.
That's the
so
funny
I'm
thing.
like, hey, hold up. You done got the wrong one. And the thing is because I know him. Like, I've seen how he acts. He's so sensitive, thin-skinned, can't take a tough conversation, even in the city council chambers. When you're
decorum
and you're talking, and he's like, if he doesn't like what he's you're saying, they'll cut your mic off. I mean, it's ridiculous. So
he's a child, man. Like, I've said this before on this show, but like sometime when things are back to functioning order, just go to a city council meeting after there's been an event like this and watch Darrell. He's he's a child. He can't fucking do it.
He's especially ill-equipped to facilitate public comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
He's almost
very diplomatic flow.
That's very
I think he is like the least equipped person on the dais to handle that role, and he's the head. It's almost amusing to watch him be so comically bad at that role.
I think I want to speak to Conrad's point. There's a funny thing about this town where they think that once you get elected office, no one will elect you out again.
Oh yeah, you just got that. You're there forever.
Right. Believe that.
Well, we historically have seen that. People get put into office. People get elected into office.
I've only been here 8 years, so I don't know.
I mean, I've been here for 14, and I feel like we've definitely seen this rhythm of people grabbing that seat, and then they're just this is it. This is where I live now.
Yeah.
Name recognition is real, and I think remembering that while we've had the internet for the better part of 2 decades, it's really been the last 10 years that it's been widespread and that people have actually been doing their due diligence. Most people before that would get a ballot in the mail or show up to their polling place and would be like, all right, whose name do I know? Or who's the Democrat, right? So it was really easy for these incumbents to just be able to have the red carpet almost laid out for them.
But something has happened the last 4 years,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
People are unwilling to be as passive as they were.
Yeah, I mean, it started with Kevin Johnson being like, I can't run for office again because he just didn't see a future for himself. And then Steve Hansen thinking that he had an easy coast into office, and out of nowhere, Katie Valenzuela knocks him out.
Beautiful.
Darrell,
extremely
this
beautiful.
could happen to you, buddy.
Love it. Love to think about it.
Totally happen to you, especially if you're not
after
coming
something
around
like
with the
this, man.
times.
Like this is a case where name recognition could work its way against him, because I don't think people will fucking forget how fucking terribly he handled this situation. I think it will be the opposite thing, where people are like, Darrell Steinberg, I know that guy. Fuck that guy.
Never heard of him.
Is there any, like, as long as the other guy doesn't like rape goats on TV, I'll fucking go for that guy.
I mean, you see how, like, how many people are stirred by what's happening in our community and nationally. You know, there's thousands of people taking the streets. Every one of those people is invested, and they're fucking paying attention. And yo, Darrell, they're kids, so they got a long voting life ahead of them. You know, like don't fucking forget the people that you need to be listening to.
Mm-hmm. Flo, you were going to say something.
Yeah, sorry, Flo, I didn't.
Oh, no, I'm good.
I actually wonder, this is maybe a little bit of a topic shift, but Flo, you recently put a status up outlining like 5 things that would be a start. Something that the city could do that would not be enough, but at least we could be talking. If they got, and I fucking loved it, and I would really be pumped to kind of hear you expound on some of that a little bit.
Yeah, and this is what Conrad said to Mayor Steinberg yesterday, so that's perfect.
Yep. And Conrad, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, get the $10 million back that you took from Measure U, first off.
I mean, come on. Yes. I can't say it enough. Give it back.
First of all.
Yeah, let's start there. Where I am with them is, and I think we've sort of talked about this earlier, is that, like, I almost want to say to them, before any of you approaches a microphone to have any more conversation, to discuss, to reference, to condemn any of the forms of protest that are happening, you need to turn that mirror around and look at yourself and say, we are an elected body of 9 individuals who has control over a city budget that is close to $1 billion. Like when you tally up a bunch of different sources, I think it's something like $700 million in general fund money and stuff like that. And so think about your collective power and start with, and outlining 5 things: reducing the overall police budget by at least, I think our starting number should be 20%, because if we're going to have to cut back the city budget, we should start with the largest pot that has the least amount of evidence, to support how it's been spent, and they should get the biggest cuts. And so in addition to that 20% just off the top, like a complete slash, also give back the $10 million that you got from Measure U. And also then we subtract from that any money that's had to be paid out in misconduct settlements and and lawsuits and any of that. All that money comes
over
out
$500,000 to the East Sac protesters who were illegally kettled.
Correct. And $2.5 million to the Clark family, I believe. Mm-hmm. And who knows what else has been paid out for the, unlawful detainment here, like the things that don't necessarily make mainstream media, but that they have to pay settlements on because they were wrong. So that should come out of their budget.
Because they're constantly doing criminal activity.
Because they don't fucking pay for it when the bill comes. We do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. And and there was the B article I think that we talked about on here that was like, oh well, because of the arena, we're gonna have to cut city services, and it's just like, wait a second. Like, so libraries and parks are going to get cut, but the police are going to not have to shoulder any of this? Like, why is that the foregone conclusion? So that's the first part, is that they need to shoulder the biggest chunk of the cuts. City council needs to categorically condemn the police violent behavior and the trauma that they inflict
our
on
police violence.
Yes,
our cops.
They need to come out and say this is not okay. And we're seeing other cities' leadership be willing to do this and be willing to move swiftly. And it just shows us that a lot of the excuses that we've heard from our council are nonsense.
Right.
They also need to proactively cancel any funds that they committed to bringing Major League Soccer to Sacramento. Like, if those rich folks want to buy their own arena and buy land and whatever else and fortify our tax base, they are welcome to do it. But public money should not be spent on that, especially since we don't even know when we're going to be able to gather in a large group, or if we're going to be able to gather in a large group for a year or more to come.
Well, especially on the heels after getting like fucked out on an arena deal that we did go for. And now we're seeing how well that fucking works out, you know, in a hard to foresee scenario.
Yes, and we certainly couldn't foresee this, but we also don't need to go further into public.
We don't need to buy another one.
Yeah, and when we haven't taken care of the people who live here.
Right.
Like, that just doesn't make sense. And especially when these teams and, you know, private owners have enough money to buy their own damn arenas.
And also,
they don't need us.
You mentioned the CARES Act.
The CARES Act money, yes. So the CARES Act is the $89 million that Sacramento got. And the fourth, you know, demand from them is that they don't spend any of that money on police. And then the fifth one would be that they actually make sure that those funds are allocated using a racial equity and analysis and justification.
Yes.
So actually going through and saying what communities most need based on what we've done, what policies we've had in the past, and who's been harmed, and making sure those funds are allocated appropriately.
Hell yeah.
And I just feel like before you even come talking to us about what, as you know, as protesters, as people who are righteously indignant, as people who want things, before you come and talk about any of that, we need to see some action on your part. We need to see some good faith on your part, that you see that these are structural issues and that you're not just going to give the platitudes and talking points, but that you're actually going to do something about it.
And when you get pushed on it, don't fucking tell people you don't know me, Darrell. Don't do that.
Yes.
What the fuck is that?
That's the worst response, dude. Like,
what the fuck?
It's also like, I do know you, because that is the most fragile response. That is like peak white fragility.
You're an old white fragile male. Yeah.
You don't know me.
I know 300 of you.
Yeah. There are at least 9 of them sitting up there.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Well, that's the other disappointing thing. If we're gonna lay it on the table,
knew she was gonna go there.
The most diverse, you know, racially diverse, and background diversity on the council, and no difference. And this is what I mean by that performative diversity. Like, I don't want to just have black folks and brown folks just showing up in spaces. I don't need Angelique to show up and represent all of the vaginas of the world. Like, that's not a good use of her time or space. Like, I want somebody up there who actually cares about women and is actually going to champion women's issues. And to me, that's the most important part. And if you're not speaking truth to power, I don't care that we share hair care products. That's not useful to me.
That's real talk. That's real.
So do something.
And this is all, like, everything, those 5 things that Flo has just laid out are really, I think they're really, one, they're important, they're on point, but also for, like, our listeners, when we talk about, like, what we can do, something that we can take from this entire weekend, from all of these protests, from people just, like, screaming for justice, is get to know where your city spends their money. And make sure that you are demanding that they spend it in different ways. And especially right now, make sure that we are demanding that the police are defunded over and over and over again. It's the only thing that's going to bring our community.
Say it over and
over again. I mean, wake up every morning, check in with yourself, make your coffee, and on all of your social media platforms, post defund the police. And then send a letter.
There's no other option other than for the police to just kill everybody in the city until there's nobody left to serve and protect. Like it fucking has to, like,
that's funny.
You know, it has to be done. It has to be done. Now there is no other option unless city council would rather just start murdering their constituents, because that's fucking next.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
One more thing. There's a County Board of Supervisors race that I like to bring up every episode. It's District 3. It is filling Susan Peters' seat, and she is the most evil Republican on the Board of Soups behind Sue Frost.
Darth Susans.
Darth Susan.
Darth Susans.
And this is now a
Sue
plus
Frost.
6.6 Democrat district. There is a Democrat, Greg Fishman, running against a man named Rich Desmond. Rich has been fingered by Susan to... did that come out wrong?
Hey, look, whatever they're doing is their business,
I'm
and
not
let's
gonna
not
yuck
yuck
their
anyone's
yum.
yum. You know,
Right, yeah.
We don't do
I
that
also
on this show.
just rewatched that episode of Insecure where they went to the day party, and so when you said fingered, I was like, oh gosh.
To my understanding, Susan Peters never fingered Rich Desmond.
Okay, thank you.
But she has chosen
We had
him
that right
to
up.
take her seat on the dais. Rich Desmond is a lifelong cop.
Nope.
And all of his campaign money, lifelong cops throwing him that money. If you think he will have any hand in changing what Sheriff Scott Jones, this
Not at
evil
all.
fucking man, is doing, you're sorely mistaken. So it's very important for people to put some weight behind Greg Fishman. We've got about 6 months to do it. Just a heads up there.
Sure.
And I would have to shout out Kula because I think she has been the most intent about highlighting the role that the county plays. And I do feel like sometimes we go after the city so much because they're the low-hanging fruit. Like we just expect so much more because they're all supposed to be these people who care about these issues and are very diverse and blah, blah, blah. And so it just feels like, come on, we should be able to push you and get something from you. Whereas the county soups are only 5 people and it's a much more conservative board. But they control so much more money and they get so much less attention. They're the ones who actually have the official role of overseeing public health. They also have an obligation to the city of Sacramento, even though they largely just kind of defer that to city, government when they actually should be doing more for the city as well. But they pay for the jail. They are responsible for a lot of the places where law enforcement between the different agencies overlap. And so it is important. And shout out to Kula Koenig, who is the president of Black Women Organized for Political Action, and has really been raising this issue everywhere she goes, is like, pay attention to the county, pay attention to the county. So I think it's important for our listeners to hear that message as well.
And they work with Sac Sister Circle on a lot of election guides,
yes,
right?
Yes. So the BWAPA and the Sacramento Sister Circle have published a guide together for, I think, the 5 or 6 election cycles. It's been a little while now. I know we've been doing voter guides since 2014, I believe.
Okay.
But yeah, we've been doing, I think, the joint ones with them at least since 2016, I think.
Okay. We are getting... Well, I mean, we knew we'd go along tonight because we're not allowed out of our homes anyway. So, and it's a big deal. So fuck it. But Conrad, thank you so much for coming on this show.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
it was a real pleasure to have you, man. It's like nice
Thank you
to.
for
I mean,
having me. Thank you so much. You know what's funny? I was thinking about something, Flo, when you talked about that Rapture movie, the Christian movie or whatever, with all they think about the Rapture. And it was like, dear Jesus, please bring the rapture, but just take the police. Leave us here. We good. It's
I like that. Yeah.
Like,
They just get lifted into the, or like, a finger snap with the infinity stone.
Right.
Yes. Come on, Thanos.
Yeah.
Come on.
Right.
Thanos.
We need an anti-cop Thanos.
Dude.
We do. I mean, just think if you had all of the power of the universe and the only thing, like Thanos was so lacking in creativity. He must have had some trauma as a kid because he could not come up with a better idea than just like basically murder half of the universe's population. And I was just like, double the universe's resources? Like, come on, dude. Like, really? You read a book, Thanos. That's what I want to say.
Yeah.
Read a book.
Agreed.
I want to finish my thank you to Conrad because
Go ahead.
from the first time I met you during the Stephon Clark protests, it was as you've described. You are fearless, and it was just astounding to see you sort of face the things you faced out in the streets. And like, I don't think people understand how dangerous this shit is, or maybe they're starting to now.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've always been like just very impressed by your work. So I'm really happy.
Well, yeah, I mean, thank you very much, Dave. You know, and thank you all for having me here. You know, and that's one thing I I mentioned in my live when I was pressing the mayor on Sunday. You know, I don't do this stuff for fame. I don't seek any type of like community recognition. A lot of times when the cameras come, I try to get off the scene. Like, I'm like, no, like, I want to talk to you. I'm going to say what I got to say and I'm out. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm going to be on the front lines. I'm going to be with community. I'm going to be, if I'm leading the chants, I'm going to be doing that. If I got to be handing out water, like, I'm here for the community as a whole. You know, I don't do it. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people use these tragic events to, you know, glorify themselves or to lift themselves up, elevate themselves, you know, and just use it as a political opportunity. And it's just so unfortunate because it's so much bigger than that. And I think that comes with me being selfless, you know, and not having that selfish desire. I mean, working in the legislature probably had something to do with it, seeing how politicians get down and seeing how they act. And it's like, that's a bunch of bullshit. Like, because, I mean, I've worked for politicians, so I can see how they literally code switch when the cameras go off.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, save all of that for somebody else. I'm not here for that. I'm really here for actual change. And that's why I do what I do. So thank you all, you know, just for having me on the show. And thank you, Dave, just for, you know, really acknowledging that and seeing, you know, me in my different modes, you know what I mean? Kind of just moving around and trying to make sure things are getting better. So
Cool. Well, I hope to see you in a mode of playing a game of pool sometimes too.
Hey, I would like that. I forgot we did play a game of pool.
That was a fun night.
Yeah. That was cool.
I wanted to take a minute, and I know we don't have to do like the whole thing where we all like say a thing, but I do feel like I want to echo Dave's thanks, and also take a moment to hold space, recognize, and honor the invaluable gift that Flo and Conrad have given to us and to our listeners by sharing their experiences with us. And I really hope that our listeners would use this window into what your experiences as Black folks on the front lines and just like living in your bodies, would just like use that as a launching point to do the fucking work, to get out there and to read the books, and we, as you know, as white folks, as non-Black people of color, we really need to have conversations with each other and like get in there and do that work. Like, you know, I know that Black folks have to get the talk about what it is going to be like to get out into the world and like to potentially come into contact with police and the risk that happens to their lives. And I think Jason Reynolds, an author, a young adult author, talks about how white people, we need to write the talk for ourselves that says you are a part of the systemic violence that continues to kill Black men and women in this community. And so I really, really hope that this episode and this incredible conversation can be used as a launching point for our white and non-BPOC listeners to just like fucking compose that talk. So thank you, like from the bottom of my cynical heart. Thank you.
I would like to echo that, and we don't all have to say a thing at the end. One thing that I would like to say, and this is maybe like a bright point, like something to look forward to in all of this awfulness. It is my pledge to you, the people of Sacramento, that as soon as the National Guard is not guarding Doco anymore, I'm going to go back to that fucking Jeff Koons sculpture and I'm going to ACAB spray. I'm just going to tag the shit out of it with ACAB tags as soon as I can. That's fucking going to happen. Goddamn right. So, dude, honestly, that image, that thing all tagged up is the closest that fucking monstrosity has ever been to a piece of art.
It was beautiful.
I fucking
Really?
loved it. Like, my dude, if whoever did that the first time, like, my hat is off. Thank you. That was
For the
wonderful.
listeners who don't know, ACAB means all cats are beautiful.
Right.
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 Learn something new every day.
Like that.
Conrad, I do want to just thank you for being on the show and for accepting our invitation tonight and for sharing your heart and your passion and your experience. And we really appreciate it. And it certainly enriched this episode so much. So happy birthday. Thank you for laboring even
Happy
through a
birthday.
day that should have just been your own celebration. And please, my greatest pleasure is being able to do this work with you and being able to consider you a friend as well. So I am just, please always know that, and thank you again for joining us tonight.
And congrats on your graduation.
Yes,
Thank
and graduation
you.
graduation too.
Oh,
Yeah, it's been a good May. He had a good May.
It's been one hell of a year.
It's been a hell of a year, yeah.
sure. Yeah.
I don't know, but it was like my birthday. I mean, my graduation happened, and then 2 weeks later was my birthday. And then in the midst of all of that was Ahmaud Arbery,
Right.
Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and countless others. So it's like, and also not to forget our trans family member who was murdered by police as well.
Yeah.
So it's been one hell of a roller coaster ride. Again, I appreciate all of you. Thank you. Just to kind of, I feel like we're wrapping up, but I just wanted to kind of get some contact information in terms of like my social media. My name is Conrad Crump, CONRAD CRUMP. My Instagram is ReadyRad33, and it's ReadyRad with 2 Ds, RADD. ReadyRad33, and my Twitter is.
I don't think I follow you on Instagram. Holy shit.
Yeah,
I didn't until yesterday either, so don't feel bad.
Okay.
I'm really haven't been.
Flo
too
never sees
much
my
on
stories,
Instagram.
so I'm like,
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just now starting to get more into the Instagram.
Do I follow you on
thing.
Instagram, Dave?
Yeah, please do.
I
and my
followed
Twitter.
Voices River City like the other day, and I was like, oh, shoot. Somehow I managed to miss this.
But no, I wanted to make sure folks have the Twitter account as well. It's _sagacious1. Sagacious meaning shrewd, much knowledge, smart, wise, prudent, all of that good stuff. _sagacious1, and 1 is the number 1. Numeral.
all right. I'll follow you there too.
So the sagacious one.
Well, I guess we have to share all of our stuff too. I will say the Voices stuff is, or should we let Sky lead us in again?
Honestly, I was gonna kind of skip that anyway. This time.
Yeah. So we're on Facebook, Voices River City, Twitter @Voices River City, Instagram @Voices River City, and that's always a real joy to see what comes up after every episode. And then we also are, our website is voicesrivercity.com. We go back 3 years with some really interesting stuff. The current iteration is just the podcast, but again, we're going to be amping up other things very soon. It's been a wild couple weeks. And I am on Twitter personally @YouKnowKempa.
I'm Guillotine for you. That's Guillotine, the number 4 YOU.
I'm Shan N.D. Stevens.
And I'm Flojaune, FLOJAUNE.
And if you want to support us, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/voicesrivercity. Anywhere between $5 a month, which is $5 of a beer that if you're being safe and social distancing, you're not going to a bar right now. And all the way up to $25 a month, which will land you a very cool Voices River City mug. Either that or one of these California mugs.
Those are all gone.
Oh, fuck. Well, we
Never
got to order
mind.
more.
Well, they can have one of mine.
We got to order a bunch of stuff anyway.
Yeah.
And then I'll get you a t-shirt too. So, thank you everyone for listening, especially those of you who are stuck at home because Darrell Steinberg doesn't think it's safe to go out.
Yeah. Well, we've been kind of signing out this way ever since COVID. But I feel like it's more prescient than ever right now. Everybody, we love you. Thank you for listening. Please stay safe.
Yes.
Stay healthy.
Don't forget to wash your hands.
Don't forget to wash your hands.
Yeah. And stay away from me.
Yeah. Absolutely.
6 feet.
Keep your 6 feet distance.
All right,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Thank you guys. Signing off.
Thank you.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right,
Conrad,
bye-bye.
don't leave us yet, though.
Okay.
Yeah, don't leave yet, darling.
All right.
We still have to record the secret episode.
Secret 3-hour episode.
episode.